Welcome to the HIT Podcast, I.C.E, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed with what we hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be no exception. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions, and without any further ado, I get to Matt Meltzer. Matt, how are you, my friend?
I am doing well. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So really quickly, kind of before we get into what HR and some of the listeners might want to hear that you have to say, give me a little bit about kind of what you do professionally and sort of how we linked up today.
Absolutely. My name is Matt Meltzer. I am a business immigration attorney. I run a firm called Meltzer Hellrung. And what a business immigration attorney does is advises companies. In my firm, we advise companies as small as entrepreneurs, as large as Fortune 500 companies on immigration matters. So compliance, getting visas, work authorization in the US and globally.
So when we talked and you said we work with all size employers, Toby, as you said, down to entrepreneurs up to Fortune 500. And what we do is advise companies on immigration stuff. I was like, man, you are the perfect person to have out here because I assume it's always relevant. I assume every time you're at a dinner party, people go, wow, what an interesting time to be doing what you're doing. But right now, I really feel like it's an interesting time to be doing what you're doing.
It's always interesting. And the second question people always ask, is Trump good for business or bad for business?
Yeah, and?
And Trump is oddly enough good for business.
Right, yeah. So there you're like, look, I hate to say it. Right, yeah, no. But I guess maybe just to kind of get right into it, on your sort of daily beat, when you're talking with employers, as someone who's an expert in what employers need to know about immigration, I guess maybe today or even broadly, what's maybe something that you see come up a lot that you'd like to tell employers? I guess, disclaimer, not legal advice right here and now, and contact you afterwards, but just kind of getting into it. What does that make you think?
Yeah, I would say there's three real quick things. One is that despite all the change and all the news, if you're in it to sponsor people for visas, very little has changed. That getting a person to show up to work if you're a sponsoring employee has not changed much at all. Two is compliance, that the government is looking for unauthorized workers, and Congress just gave them many extra billions of dollars to do so. And you should expect that at some point the government might be at your door. And now is the time to get your compliance house in order. And three is international travel, and it affects everyone. And you don't know necessarily who it might affect because it might not be just people who have visas. It could be people who have loved ones. It might even affect U.S. domestic travel, people not wanting to go places where they might get stricter supervision or inspection.
So I guess taking those things in order, when you talk about sponsoring and how very little has changed, what are maybe a couple of the key things to know about sponsoring, even if it hasn't necessarily changed per se, but just while I kind of have, an immigration expert here with me, what's the scoop on sponsoring?
So sponsoring could be anytime a company wants to get a visa specifically for an employee. So that's something like an H-1B for a software engineer or a dentist. Could be a H-2B for short-term work. That could be your landscape worker. It could be someone working in a fishery plant. And so basically the processes, regardless of what it is, are stable. The things that we've seen probably for the past decade are just the same. They have not changed. And we're not expecting major change anytime soon.
Do employers need to prove that they couldn't have found an American to do this job? Or is it difficult to find somebody? Or what are some of those pitfalls?
Yeah, it depends on the visa you're applying for. For short-term work, the answer is yes. So short-term work, you generally need to show that you couldn't find U.S. workers. But most times those companies are willing to accept U.S. workers too, but they have more positions to fill than they can find U.S. workers for. Most other visas, the answer is no. It's really just based on the individual. You're saying that this is the person we need, and that's the end of the story. But for green card sponsorship, if a company wants to get a permanent residency, then the company has to say, we are looking to find a qualified U.S. citizen or permanent resident, and we couldn't find one.
I wonder if people are finding it harder to sponsor because it's like folks might not want to show up to work and get accosted by ICE type of a thing.
So most of the people who like at my firm works with are really high skill employees. So
Yeah.
you're talking about doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, managers. And so they're choosing to be in the US and they're not, they might have more fears now, but they very much want to have work authorization. For people who didn't have work authorization before, those people are hard to get something new for anyway. And then there's a whole bunch of people that companies had been hiring lawfully that have been losing work authorization rapidly due to the changing policies of the Trump administration.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that kind of leads me to your second point earlier, which was getting your compliance house in order. That's a decent segue there. What do you mean by that? I mean, I don't even know what I don't know. Like, what would an employer want to pick your brain about if they had an opportunity
Yeah.
to sit in my chair and ask these questions?
The biggest thing is I-9s. Every employer, regardless of who you are, you have to fill out an I-9 every time you hire a W-2 employee. And I-9s are tricky, remarkably so. Uh, if you are file every time you fill out an I-9, if you make a technical violation and you're inspected, you can be fined a couple hundred to a couple $1,000s per violation. Even if you lawfully hired the worker, you just fill out the form wrong. So the first thing is, do you have your I-9s correct? And have you reasonably examined that the people who are working for you do have work authorization?
Within filling them out correctly, what are some of the major pitfalls or maybe some things that trip people up commonly?
First thing is, did you fill them out timely? So this is really not much to resolve going backwards, but going forward, you need to get them done within the first 3 days that the person is on the job. And so sometimes companies are a little lackadaisical about doing that on timely. And the second thing is just are you using the correct version? They update the form. Sometimes employers haven't looked in years to see if they have the correct version,
Mm,
or they're using something that's an inappropriate version inadvertently. There's an English language version and there's a Spanish version. And people say, oh, I have a Spanish speaking employee. I'll use the Spanish version. But they don't know that you can only use the Spanish version in Puerto Rico.
Oh, wow. Oh, interesting. Yeah, a little stuff like that. That's a great tip. So I guess that's a little bit on the I-9s piece of the compliance. I presume there's more to the compliance piece than just the I-9s.
I think, yeah, with compliance, I think you also have to be as an employer saying, who are we hiring? There are employers who know that they have people who are not lawfully working for them. Those are companies, some of those people are quitting. But if you are an employer and you know you don't have people who are work authorized, you should be really hesitant and cognizant of it. Uh, the government has stated that they're looking for companies to go after where the company knowingly has 15 unauthorized employees for criminal prosecution. So that means the company owner, HR representatives could potentially be criminally responsible for that. And, there's a lot of people who, there's things where employers and employees are sort of knowingly in on I won't call it a scam, but a process where perhaps employees aren't presenting totally authentic documents and they look authentic enough. So the company says, we've looked, they look reasonably authentic. We filled out an I-9. But if you know in your heart of hearts that they don't pass muster, then you should be saying, do we really want to keep these employees around?
So is that going back to the criminal prosecution?
It could be. Yes.
That's wild. So these employers, like you said, even if like they're presented something that, like you said, you maybe got to squint a little, but hey, I'm not, what am I supposed to be, some official on what these documents are? Like,
Yeah, so I mean, you have to be I want to be careful. Like, most employers are not going to be subject to criminal prosecution because you'd have to say the employer knowingly accepted documents they knew were false. So they'd have to prove that. So, but if there is any kind of paper trail or there's a whistleblower employee who might know who has an accident,
yeah.
then absolutely.
And
If
you're
the
saying this goes all the way up to leadership and potentially
right,
even HR and has criminal ramifications.
correct,
That's chilling.
right. And by and large, most employers aren't doing this.
Yeah, but
You
by and large, this is why everyone's leaving HR.
know, yeah, but I would imagine that even the majority of people listening to this podcast have nothing to be worried about.
Yeah, not my listeners. That's why they listen, bro.
Right,
They get the good advice
right.
and they do things right.
if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably in the clear just by virtue of the fact that you're the kind of person listening to this
It's
podcast.
funny. This is kind of a sidebar, but there's this joke of a parenting book that is just one page that says you don't need this, because anybody that's going to go out of their way to buy a parenting book and spend money on it and would have read it, it's not the type of guy that needs a parenting book. The type of guy that needs a parenting book's the one that has no interest in this. I need to push it under their nose.
That's probably fair.
Yeah. Okay, so a little bit on the compliance that I'm such a nervous guy. I'm like, I gotta make jokes. This is insane to me. Like, this is criminal. This is so scary. What's maybe something else from just a compliance piece before we move on? Because I know you also mentioned travel, and I want to pick your brain on that a little bit. But just while we have you, interested, if there's an employer out there that is interested in the topic of immigration, and we have an immigration expert on with us, from a compliance standpoint, something else that we maybe haven't touched on yet that you'd like to make sure is said.
I would just say that I've always advised employers that if you're a white collar workforce, you're a low risk of this stuff. And you don't have to really worry about it. Or if you use E-Verify, you're a low risk. I think the hallmark of the Trump administration is that they are looking for leverage wherever it comes. So even if you are an employer and you're low risk for I-9, but you are sensitive to something else that the government is interested in, they can use I-9 compliance as leverage point in that. So if you have a potential merger, or there's a politically active board member, or you're asking for a permission for some sort of grant or license that is politically sensitive, be aware that they're going to look for other leverage
To
points
have the rest of your
with
house in
it.
order, sort of a thing,
Yeah,
before you go ahead and step into the sunlight.
exactly.
Yeah. When you talk about how easy it is to trip up on an I-9, first and foremost, obviously, people can reach out to you, find you on LinkedIn, and of course, we can get your information in a lower third here. But as far as an HR person listening, going, I actually do want to make sure I've got the most up-to-date I-9, or I do want to make sure I fill these out correctly. Are there good resources, or where might you steer somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. So on our website, meltzerhellrung.com, we have resources on doing self I-9 audits and good housekeeping with I-9s. Those are free. So
Love it.
please make yourself come over and visit our website and download those materials.
I love that. And I appreciate you making that available to everybody. That's super cool. I guess lastly, one of the points you brought up was travel earlier, and we haven't really pulled at that thread yet. What did you mean by that?
I would say that the most frequent new questions we get from our clients are about travel. And it's not just travel internationally, it's travel inside the US too. So for people who have some kind of visa or work authorization, is it safe to travel? Are there reasons to avoid traveling? They're the hardest questions to answer because things shift all the time. On our website, we have a travel advisory giving real-time information about what is happening around the world and inside the US. Most employers are pretty cognizant of who their foreign employees are and what they need to manage international travel. But as immigration enforcement has gone up inside the US, many employees who are US citizens are also scared. You, as an employer, don't know who your employees are married to. I
Mm,
guarantee you that for every employer listening, they have a US citizen employee married to an undocumented spouse.
yeah.
That US citizen employee may say, I don't want to travel to this place because what ends if the police ask me about my husband or my spouse? And there's no way to assuage them about that. That's a fear that you're not going to get past. And you have to recognize that those fears are real and that employees may be unwilling to go to a conference or a training in certain places because of fears they have about their family members.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good note. I'm really glad you brought that up. Thank you. So I think we kind of worked our way through those top three bullet points you brought up at the beginning. Do you have any thoughts to maybe bring us home? I know as a podcast, we really try to keep to bite size and digestible, but I'm loving this conversation. I'm just curious before we get out, if there's anything we haven't touched on yet that you thought, listen, while we're together, here's one last good nugget.
Great question. Uh, I would say that the last thing is uh, work site visits.
Mm,
That's for any ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is doing more visits to work sites. And they could be looking for unauthorized workers, but they can also be looking just for unauthorized individuals. It may have nothing to do with the company. So if you are a public space, I would like to remind listeners that ICE visited Dodger Stadium, not because they were looking for workers who work for the Dodgers. They were looking for people in the parking lot. So it's important that anyone who works at a company say, what are we going to do if the government visits us? What is on limits and what is off limits? What's a private space? What's a public space? How are we defining it? And who's going to interact with the government if they come?
So a good kind of best practice takeaway is grappling with this thought as a company and figuring out, I guess, a policy, right? So you're not just sort of caught flat-footed.
Right, exactly. As I said, it's not necessarily about what you as a company are doing. It could be about who visits your company. And if you are open to the public, you should reasonably expect that it's possible that the government might visit your place of business and just have a plan of what's going to happen if that occurs.
Yeah, I feel like food and beverage, hospitality, all these sorts of companies that really need to be listening to this entire episode, and even there at the end, right? Mm.
Exactly. Everyone is impacted by this regardless of who you employ.
Yeah, cool. Well, man, I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your wisdom and your website and all the great resources there. I really, really appreciate it. These are exactly the types of talks we're trying to bring to the listeners. So thank you so much, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's all the time we have for you guys this week on the episode. We appreciate you guys so much. Blessed to be here. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Montage Insurance Solutions, Excel Health, TrueHue, Rula, all the guys that keep the lights on. Thank you guys for tuning in every week. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.